Empower Missouri is about a 120-year-old advocacy organization across the state. We like to say we're the oldest and largest anti-poverty organization around Missouri. And we work passionately to end poverty in our state. We do that through a variety of ways, but we lead 3 statewide coalitions: the Affordable Housing Coalition, Food Security Coalition, and Criminal Justice, to talk about those 3 areas of poverty, while we lend support and capacity to other agencies that really talk about kind of the myriad of issues that people in poverty experience in and around our communities. Donna is going to speak today quite a bit about all the different places that poverty expresses itself in our neighbors' lives and how they play together and create situations that are very difficult for the folks who live near us. So we're really excited to hear that. Before we get started, we like to do a little speed networking, kind of get to know each other, sort of 5 minutes together. So I'm going to send you into breakout rooms. Nobody needs to do anything, although I will need a moment of silence while I remember how to do that, and send you out into breakout rooms for about 5 minutes. Some people really love icebreaker questions and some really do not. That's a common topic of conversation in our organization even. So I like to just provide like a little word of wisdom. You can take that with you and chat through it if you'd like to in your breakout time. And if not, just introduce yourself and your agency or whatever kind of works for you in those few minutes to help you feel connected to advocates across our state. Because I know even as some groups are starting to open up a little bit more again, many of us are just sort of missing that connection with our colleagues, with our partners around. And so this was one way that we sort of started to create that. So this is going to send you out here in just a minute into small groups, 3 or 4 people per room. You'll have about 5 minutes and then I'll pull you back automatically. So I'm going to go ahead and send you out. There we go. There should be a little box that says you can join a breakout room and it should send you right over there. Carlin, you are not in a room.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good. How are you? There you go. You should have a box now to just join. Oh, she figured it out. She got it. Oh, Mallory, because you're not a host, it would have sent you into a room, which I apparently put out of order. So that's fun for everybody. All right, good. So we're going to have Donna Fogarty come and talk to us about the Missouri Poverty Report. She's the executive director of the Missouri Community Action Network, or MOCAN. We at Empower Missouri, we know that the information that's provided directly by people who are experiencing poverty is the most important foundation for our advocacy work. They are the closest to the problem. They understand the problem in ways that no one else ever will. And one of the things that MOCAN does is put out these poverty reports. And so the poverty report data really helps us to contextualize poverty as a whole system that interplays in lots of places in someone's life. And that then there's like no one simple solution, right? We can't just change this one thing and then we're going to fix all the issues of poverty. So we use this data all the time in our coalition work and across all the work that our agency does. And I'm hoping that today's audience, all of you, really engage with this data and with the reality of the people that we see who are asking for assistance across the state and what they're going through in their lives. So Donna's been the executive director of MOCAN for about 3 years now. Before that, she worked at the Northern Kentucky Community Action Commission. So she's well steeped in the issues of poverty and what that looks like in folks' lives. She's a social worker with a master's degree in business administration from the Thomas More College. And that is the entirety of the information that I stole from her LinkedIn profile because my life is hectic and crazy right now and got away from me. And I didn't ever reach out to her to get her full official bio. And so I just stole things. Hopefully, if there are really important things that she'd like you to know about her, she will share them with us during her time. And I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you, Donna. I think that you wanted to share the screen, so I'm going to stop my share now. Are you able to do that?
I should be able to. Let me check here. Okay. Hopefully everyone can see that. I'll just share the cover here. So I want to preface this by saying that, you know, we just didn't know what we didn't know when we put this out at the beginning of 2020. Who knew that everything would just become so disrupted? And, you know, that really all of the work that was put into this poverty report became, you know, it's a wonderful report. It's a wonderful tool. But looking back and going over it, you know, things just got turned upside down with COVID. And so things look a little bit differently than what, you know, now than what we have put in here. The hard work was done by Sarah Hackman. She was an employee of Missouri Community Action Network for a little over 4 years. She did she spearheaded the 2018 poverty report as well as the 2020. And so she worked with Missourians to End Poverty, and specifically with Jesse Dryden, who is a member of Missourians to End Poverty, on collecting all of this wonderful, rich data that we're going to go over, and really to be able to give people a picture of exactly what it looks like for those who are experiencing poverty in Missouri. So I cannot take credit for any of this. I guess that's what I'm trying to say, but I'm lucky enough to be able to share the information. I just want to say that a lot of everything we do at Missouri Community Action Network, we try to really convey the participants in our programs, our agency programs' voices, and represent them as best that we can and share their stories. The person on the front of the poverty report for 2020, she was a patron of the Samaritan Center, and it just shows that, you know, people who are struggling have a very difficult time with many areas of their life, and one of those is, of course, transportation, and families and individuals who have to rely on food banks and different food pantries to supplement their nutrition often have to walk and then walk home. So we really wanted to show that life can be pretty difficult for those who are struggling, who do not have transportation of their own. So that is a person who went to our food pantry in Jefferson City. So again, 2020 marked a big year. Again, we didn't know how big it was actually going to be. A new decade, we had an election, we had our census, and that's when things count, literally, of course. But every 2 years, Missourians to End Poverty and the Missouri Community Action Network put the poverty report out. It's meant to illustrate the interconnected nature of life's basic necessities, the economic and family security, education, food and nutrition, health, and housing and energy. And at Missouri Community Action Network, we call those the 5 elements of poverty. And throughout the report, you'll see those representations, these little symbols that when we're talking about one of the certain areas. Again, the report aggregates stories of Missourians in need in a tangible way, and we hope that it can help with decision-making for both legislators, funders, and for different organizations who really need this data to be able to write grants and ask for money to be able to support what you do. We always try to honor, of course, the words embedded in marble in our state house, and that is to let the welfare of the people be the supreme law. Ultimately, this is a guide to how welfare and, of course, quality of life is experienced through stratified experiences. I want to point out that anytime you want to download the poverty report, you can just take a picture of, use the QR code in the corner. You'll get the full bibliography as well as an opportunity to download the report digitally. So moving on, we did a lot of work in terms of how are we going to define poverty. As you know, the official poverty measure was developed in 1963, a very long time ago. It's based upon the cost of minimum food diet in today's prices. It's multiplied by 3 for various family sizes. And that official poverty calculation does not take into account the value of federal benefits such as SNAP or housing and energy assistance, and nor does it account for the typical household expenses such as any kind of work expenses or childcare. So this page just really talks about the different poverty measures, the supplemental poverty measure, what the 2020 poverty guidelines are. And then it shows a little bit of a difference between the 50%, 100%, and 200% of poverty. So to talk a little bit about that, sometimes you'll see data that refers to 50%, 100%, or 200%. And this section here just kind of goes over that and what that really means. And just to talk about the 50%, unfortunately, there's a lot of people living at 50% or less, which is deep and extreme poverty. And inflation actually, trying to get this out of the way here. Inflation year to year outpaces the change in the poverty level year to year. So I feel like I'm preaching to the choir here, but as you guys know, the cost of goods increases while lower income populations have a higher cost burden. So those thresholds, like 200% of the poverty level, help increase an understanding of what families require to meet basic needs. And after the report, I'm going to talk a little bit about the importance of hopefully increasing that poverty level to 200% for eligibility in different areas. This page also shows a 2-year comparison. As you'll see, from 2017 to 2018, the actual number of people below the 200% poverty line decreased, while our total population increased in Missouri. And the number below 50% of the poverty line actually decreased as well. So that's a good thing. And then we had COVID, so. This next page just is a poverty overview. It just compares across the nation with Missouri, and we have a great representation here of what the poverty level is in every county in Missouri. Lots and lots of folks use this pretty frequently to determine, the needs in different counties in the service areas of our community action agencies. Unfortunately, 13.2% of Missourians live below the federal poverty level, which is almost 800,000 folks. And as you can see, the rates are extremely high down in the boot heel. The Mississippi County, Penobscot County, Dunklin County are incredibly high poverty rates. So again, our statewide rate is 13.2%, and that's a negative 0.02% change from 2017. There are 14 counties that have a poverty rate below 10% in our state. And that just kind of goes to show, again, kind of the unequal wealth distribution among our state. This goes on to just kind of show, more in detail the different counties with the lowest poverty rates. And what we have seen historically, the historic trends in the US and the Missouri poverty, while lower than the US average in the late 1990s and early 2000s, Missouri statewide poverty rate has stayed near pretty much what the nationwide poverty rate has been over the years. A steady increase in the Missouri poverty rate, however, was seen from 2012 when the poverty rate reached 16.2, and that's been followed by a steady decline, thankfully, to the 2019 statewide poverty rate of 13.2. Again, this just breaks it down actually by demographics and shows poverty rates and how they differ between different races and ethnicities. And one thing I will say that Sarah and Jesse did such a wonderful job on, especially this poverty report, was really breaking out the demographics and how poverty affects our different neighbors who are of different races and different ethnicities. So one of the areas that we really like to talk about is economic and family security and how it affects families, how poverty affects families in many ways, but really just the bottom line. Economic security is that foundational well-being of any individual or family. It's what allows for greater access to healthcare, to nutritious foods, to transportation. So it really is that foundational aspect of families' well-being. Throughout the past 3 decades, the most affluent American families have added to their net worth, and while those who are less affluent have dipped into what we call a negative wealth, and that is the value of debts are exceeding the assets. This talks about the median household income and then what the median household income is for the 10 counties with our highest poverty rates in Missouri, as well as the lowest rates. And as you can see, poverty tends to just perpetuate itself over and over in areas. I know most of you have heard and researched and seen, that place matters. It does matter where you're born and where you live on your ability to become economically mobile. Again, there's income volatility as well. That is a factor, and Missouri ranks 46th highest for income volatility. And that is when, basically, of course, your income is more volatile than your neighbors is because of different factors. And then I talked a little bit before about the equality or inequality in Missouri, and that is the richest 20% of households in Missouri make 4.5 times as much income annually as compared to the poorest 20% of households in Missouri. In our state, we rank 22nd highest for income inequality. And down here, it just shows 36, almost 37% of workers in St. Louis are low-wage workers, and almost 35% in Jefferson City earn a low wage. Moving on to the next page, it'll show median and average Missouri family, and that's another really cool thing that was done on this report, and that we're carrying just an average Missouri family through kind of what their income is, what their expenses are, and kind of what their life looks like in terms of trying to meet those expenses. So as you go through the report, you can just kind of see in each area how that affects their financial well-being. And then we talk about minimum wage and how it's $9.45. You need to be making $9.45, or those at $9.45 for 40 hours is still under the poverty level. Education, of course, has a huge impact as well. Undoubtedly, education is a key strategy for poverty reduction. We know that especially women with higher degrees have a higher earning potential and have a better chance at getting out of poverty. The significant barriers exist for low-income students. The cost of traditional higher education has increased exponentially, as we all know, and the cost of seeking education in that traditional route sets potential for future economic hardships with the student debt crisis. I thought this statistic down here on education was pretty poignant. Unfortunately, those with less than a high school degree, diploma, the poverty rate is much higher than those with a bachelor's degree or higher. And for women, it is significantly worse than for men. We go on to talk about high school graduation rates and what Missouri looks like in terms of high school diploma attainment. Missouri is actually pretty high in high school graduation rates. We're at 88.3%. But we do go on to take a look at what the rates are of graduation for different races and ethnicities in Missouri. And you can see that Asian and white persons graduate at a higher rate than our Hispanic and Black neighbors. And then if you are homeless, have special education needs, have limited English proficiency, and for those who are in the foster care system, those graduation rates are much lower even. And this is a great little graphic here, just talking about, where our students go once they do graduate. Food and nutrition is, of course, another really important aspect in just meeting basic needs, and that people who are struggling to make ends meet have trouble with food insecurity. It does continue to plague our state. There's a lot of variables, of course: unemployment rates, median income, poverty rates, home ownership rates, and other predictors of food insecurity. And I know many of us have worked with families for many, many years who continue to struggle with food insecurity. Again, it's well documented that there's a correlation between poverty rates and food insecure households. As you can see down here in the Boot Heel and in the southern part of our state, where poverty rates are higher, so is food insecurity. And just to show, show that, we have another table down here, and to point out that food insecurity rate is higher for households with children, 2/5 higher, in fact, than the rate of households without children. And this just talks about the importance of SNAP and other programs that help, I guess, lessen a little bit of the food insecurity. SNAP is also, of course, good for our economy, especially working with our local farmers and our local farmers markets. In Missouri, 4,996 authorized retailers participate in SNAP. And they redeemed about 1.1 billion in SNAP benefits in 2017. We also talk about how the National School Lunch Program is for free and reduced lunches for kiddos. It does help address some food insecurity, which we all saw the problems with that when kids were stopped from going to school last year and earlier this year. So hopefully with them back in school, that's going to help. Lots of resources did come out to help fill that gap, but lots and lots of kiddos were still going hungry. So I'm glad to see them back in school and able to eat. Then we talk about health, health insurance and access to health care. So uninsured rates have steadily increased since 2016. In 2018, 9.4% of Missourians did not have healthcare coverage. I'm going to talk a little bit later how important that is and how awesome it is that we finally expanded Medicaid and folks are able to start accessing that. We also talk about life expectancy and the poverty rate and those connections. The poverty rate in our 10 counties with the highest poverty rate, our life expectancy is much lower. As you can see, for example, Pemiscot County is a 29.1% poverty rate, and the life expectancy is 70 years and 7 months. Whereas St. Charles County, the poverty rate is 5.7%, and life expectancy is a full 10 years, almost 10 years more for individuals. We also talk about medical debt and collections, and that is significant for people living in poverty or trying to get out of poverty, is that debt is going to haunt them, and especially if it's on their credit bureau record, that's a huge barrier. And then we talk about the prevalence of poverty, health factors, and access to medical care on this next page. And again, income is strongly associated with morbidity and mortality across income distribution, and income-related health disparities appear to be growing over time. Things like diabetes, heart disease, all of those risk factors and increase your risk factors to get that when you are living in poverty and do not have access to health care. We talked a lot about social isolation here as well, being a health issue. Social isolation is a health risk for older adults. We see adults age 65 and older are, poverty, living alone, especially when you're divorced, separated, or widowed, or never been married. If there's a disability, and then if there's any kind of independent living difficulty, chronic social isolation increases that mortality at risk compared to high blood pressure and lack of exercise. And we also talk a lot about ACEs, the adverse childhood experiences, having a huge impact on health. Those traumatic events in childhood can be emotionally painful or distressing, and typically have lifelong impacts and effects for children as they grow older. And then substance abuse disorder in Missouri, we ranked 39 highest for adults with substance abuse disorder in 2017, and 20% of the population, or 925,000 people. Experiencing some disorder, which is a crime right there, and that we cannot do better. Hopefully we will be able to do better in the future for our neighbors that are experiencing that. Okay, so housing and energy, huge impact in housing and energy area for people who are having trouble becoming financially stable. Your housing is unaffordable, affordable housing does not exist, or the wait lists are incredibly long, and folks often have to face the choice between paying for rent or buying food or prescriptions. And as we know, even with stable housing, there's a strong correlation between home ownership and wealth. We talk a lot about adult home ownership rates increasing with household income. Unfortunately, Black home ownership has gone down pretty drastically over the last several years. We talk about if Black homeownership rate were the same today as it was in 2000, America would have 770,000 more Black homeowners. Right now, homeowners who are Black have been the slowest to recover from the Great Recession, and the rate has decreased to below pre-crisis levels. And then we talk a lot about, just affordability of rent. Rent affordable is the rent that would be affordable to somebody who's living with SSI, supplemental security income recipients. That affordability for rent is $231, and we all know that that does not exist unless they have a subsidy. Extremely low income renter households in Missouri, we see that that is composed of seniors, those who have a disability, and actually those who are working and that are in the workforce but earn low wages. The highest average rent for a 2-bedroom in Missouri for 2019 was $953 a month, while the lowest average was $646 for a 2-bedroom apartment. And we all know that that is still way out of reach for many of the people who are struggling. I want to hit a little bit on the energy burden before I move on, and that Missouri households below 50% of the federal poverty level pay 29% of their annual income alone just for their energy bills. And that's nearly 154,000 Missouri households that have an income below 50% of the federal poverty level and are paying just a criminal amount of their income for just energy. And those between 50 and 100% of the federal poverty level have a home energy burden of 16%, which is still way, way too high. This just goes on to talk about fair market rent, what the average worker's wage in Missouri is, and yet the wage needed to afford a 2-bedroom apartment or house is exceeding that. The annual income needed to afford a 2-bedroom dwelling without spending more than 30% of one's income on housing is $33,284, and 74 work hours per week at minimum wage is necessary, which again is not okay. And then we talk about homelessness and the impact of homelessness and housing, the ability to get housing, especially when you're an unaccompanied youth. Then this is a really great section here that talks about the difference between urban and rural poverty, and just the impacts on, once you're in poverty and you're in rural Missouri, how hard it is to get access to even just basic things like food banks, access to medical care, access to transportation. And then they took a really deep dive into senior populations and different subpopulations in urban and rural regions and what that looks like in those areas. The quality of housing and cost energy, the cost of energy is also brought up again here. And really just the rental assistance programs, while they help working families and those with low incomes, of course, as you know, there's not enough. So I'm going to stop sharing and talk a little bit about what we can do in those areas. So how do you want me to stop talking? Actually, I feel like I've talked a lot.
We can take some questions now, Donna.
Okay.
I know that the priority agenda that you guys put together at MOCAN is not that different really than what Empower Missouri generally ends up with.
Right.
Both of our agencies are really concerned with making sure that the money that we spend is actually doing what it's designed to do, to help people in poverty, help people get housed, put food in their bodies, and take care of their basic needs. Kathy would like to know if you could link the report in the chat box, Donna, or I can do that while somebody else has got a question.
Take a little bit.
Yeah, let me find it if somebody else has got it, wants to come off mute.
The address is just MissouriPovertyReport.com.
There we go. Just put it in the chat box.
Perfect.
This is something that our staff tends to come back to pretty regularly. We'll find things that we missed last time, or numbers that stood out to us this time that didn't last time. So I think probably all of us just have it on our desktop.
Yes.
Be frequently visiting it.
We will be publishing a new one in 22. And so the gathering of data has already started. And thankfully, we did have a census this last year, and there's a lot of great new information. So any other questions or?
I have a question. How does you said there will be a new report in 22, and I'm wondering preliminarily how that compares to what you've seen in the past with the pandemic and everything. How are we looking?
Well, I will say, and this was something I was going to talk a little bit about, the direct transfers of cash from the government has obviously been a really positive thing for many families who are struggling. The stimulus payments, the tax credits are actually showing an impact already, and that the fallout from the pandemic was not as significant as what we all were very scared it was going to be because of those payments.
Sorry, I have one more question. Does that impact? So there's a lot of money that's been sent to the state for and municipalities for housing and utility assistance for those impacted by the pandemic. And I keep hearing that those monies are still there. They're hardly being used.
Yes.
And we know that people are struggling. Is that because has the stimulus money helped with that? Is it people unable to approve the impact? Help me understand.
Yeah, I don't know exactly. MHDC, I think they have not done an incredible job of getting the word out. I know that our agencies work with people every day who are calling and coming in and asking for rental assistance. So I'm not really sure what the overall barrier is. I know that in the beginning it was more of a technology barrier because the application had to be completely done online and upload your documents. And I know a lot of our agencies helped with that, but for those who couldn't get in to get assistance with that, they were struggling to even be able to apply. I know that they did put out a paper application, which has possibly helped increase the access to it. But I can't really say for sure what the ultimate barrier has been. And that's meaningful assistance. I mean, it will pay for a year. So if you could imagine that meaningful assistance could get into the hands of everyone who needs it, how much that would help.
Yeah, I can speak a little bit to that, Donna, because we've been really monitoring that. I think you're exactly right, Julie, that there's a historic amount of rental and utility assistance, and we're hearing that it's not going out, and it feels really confusing because it's exactly the opposite of what a lot of people are reporting, right? That agencies are getting 300% increases, 1,000% increases to who they used to, be asking to the number of applications that they used to get. And that they've got waiting lists that are thousands long. It really is, I think there's a couple of policy issues that were attached to that, and then just some programmatic stuff. So I will say that Missouri is one of the better states. This is a national problem with getting these assistants out. Missouri is one of the better states. We're doing better than the national average, which is still dismal and very sad. So that's an important thing to note. The applications have not been easy there, as well as the agencies really had not received the dollars that they needed to administer the money, right? Like somebody has to review these applications, somebody has to approve them, write the actual check, and MHDC and others really didn't get the amount of resources that it actually takes to do that amount of work. So there's a significant backlog that's sitting, and it's very concerning, particularly with most of our state was never covered by an eviction moratorium other than the CDC moratorium, which has now been struck down. And that's very concerning. We are also one of the top 10 states right now of people who are behind on rent, or who self-report being behind on rent. So there are a number of issues, and it absolutely is not that there's not a need for that assistance. It's just not getting out quickly enough and into hands as much as we would hope that it would. That's a very good question. And actually MHDC has on their website, they have a dashboard where you can see how many applications have been submitted, how many have been approved, and how many have actually been written. And you can see that there's like a lot of applications that are sitting there waiting to be processed. And hopefully landlords and other folks continue to be as flexible as possible, because these dollars are there, they can get into hands. It just isn't happening as quickly as we'd hoped.
Sarah, does that mean that the system is now corrected and things are moving forward, or is there still some other barriers, federal, state, otherwise?
There are still barriers. The Department of Treasury has continued to issue more and more guidance that really at this point, like everyone should be able to self-attest. We should be certifying people as quickly as possible. So like if somebody comes and says, I can't pay my rent because I was impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic, agencies should just be trusting that that's happening. That's not entirely the way it's happening in Missouri, unfortunately, but we're moving in the right direction, but we're certainly, I would not say that all of the issues have been addressed and we're now issuing checks quickly by any means. MHDC also staffed up. I think they hire like 4 full-time people, I think that's right. They hired a number of staff. Other agencies across the state have also hired a number of staff. And it's a little bit convoluted how those dollars came in and where they came and what the formula was. And so I don't think there's necessarily a bad guy, right, to get upset with about it, but we're moving in the right direction and this is a problem nationally. Yeah.
Well, in our state, like you said, our legislature like limited severely the amount of admin money.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, MHDC, the federal law said that the agencies could get 10%. 10% of the money could be used for administrative costs. MHDC, I think, ended up asking for about 6.5%, 7% for administrative costs, and they received less than half of what they asked for. So if you don't want dollars to go out, excuse me, that's one way to do it, I suppose. But yeah. All right, excellent. Well, Donna, thank you so much. I'm going to just share a couple more announcements and then we'll let folks go here. Let me share back over here because I just feel like visuals are fun. Good. We have our annual conference coming up November 4th and 5th. We have rebranded it and are calling it the Anti-Poverty Advocates Summit. We hope that as many of you as possible will join us that day and become engaged in some of the planning, by offering engaged, excuse me, I'm trying to talk too quickly and my brain just doesn't work that way right now, by offering breakout sessions that are, you all hold unique knowledge and we want to share that knowledge with folks. The registration for that is not yet available, but there is information on our website. So I linked both of those things, the application for a breakout proposal, as well as information about the summit, which will be all virtual this year again. Here's a few of our upcoming events. All of our coalitions meet in the next couple of weeks. So if you're able to, please consider joining us early part of October, as well as the summit in November. Oh, I did want to mention too, all of our coalitions will meet at the Poverty Summit or at the Anti-Poverty Summit, where we will finalize our legislative agendas. So if that's something that you're really passionate and want to help out with, please be sure to do that. And for those of you who represent agencies with clients, we want to make sure that if there are clients who are able and interested to attend, that they're able to be there and have their voices heard as well. So please reach out to me. We have a number of scholarships and things to make sure that people experiencing poverty can be meaningfully included in those policy recommendations. Here's all of our social media links so you can connect with us outside of these spaces. I'll tell you that our Instagram account is sort of the child of our communications department right now. Rika's very excited about it doing well. So if you have a minute on your phone here, hop on and give us a like there. And if you want to send us anything fun in the mail, there's our mailing address, the general info, and the office number. You, of course, can also reach out to me, sarah@empowermissouri.org. I also failed to mention earlier that we do provide CEUs for these meetings. So if you are a social worker or otherwise have a licensure that you need continuing education, please reach out to Christine. She coordinates that. It's Christine at empowermissouri.org. And possibly if she's still halfway listening, she could pop her email address in the chat box for us too here. Other than that, I just want to thank you all for joining us this afternoon and hope you have a great weekend.